Well, hello and welcome to Unit 9.2, the second unit in our module on data management and on-farm cultivar testing. And we're going to continue in this unit to learn more about the theory around data management, some of the terminology and vocabulary linked to the data management planning that we talked about in the last unit. So here's an outline of what we're going to do in this unit, and there's going to be sort of three different lecture sections in the unit, and those will be broken up by a couple of different self-directed learning activities where you'll get to go away and kind of apply what we've just covered in the previous section of the lecture. So hopefully, even though the content is maybe a little bit dry in some ways, hopefully by going away and doing some learning activities, you'll be able to stay interested and really kind of reinforce some of those concepts that I'll be presenting and talking about in the lecture bit. So we'll start by talking about metadata and data documentation. And first of all, let's just remind ourselves about this concept of fair data that we covered in the last unit. So here's just a graphic that represents fair data to us with those four words that it's an acronym for. So fair being F being findable, A accessible, I interoperable, and R reusable. And really, our data management plan that we talked about in the last unit is all about how we can manage our data to meet those four principles of fair data. And likewise, the metadata and data documentation that we're going to talk about now are parts of the tools or the components that you need when managing data to ensure that it's fair. So documentation versus metadata. The two terms are often confused, okay, but they're not the same thing. So metadata is what the data set is, where it is, and how to cite it. And it's really the information that you provide if you're uploading a resource or a data set, and we're mainly talking about data sets in this module, to a repository, and you want to make sure that it's findable so that machines, internet searches, database search engines can easily find it. So it's not a lot of long text files. It's more kind of a set of key fields with some fairly standardized ways of describing the information in those fields. So we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But it's not the same. So it's data about the data. That's not the same as the documentation. So how that data set was created, what it contains, and how to use it. We need to provide that as well if that data is really going to be reusable. So we might upload a data set with the metadata, which is, I'll show you in a minute, but just fairly brief, succinct information about what that data set is. But for people to use it, they really need to know more about how it was created, and the protocols, the methods, that sort of thing. So that's the documentation. So that's a set of files for people to read so they can understand, interpret, and reuse the data correctly. So slightly different metadata versus documentation. Let's look at metadata. Oh, we'll look at documentation a little bit more first. So you can think of it like a user manual for the data, sort of a handbook to help someone who's looking at that data set you shared and wants to really drill down into it and use it for analysis. So it'll explain how that data set was created, what it contains, how to use it. Human readable, right? So it's basically text files that you would read, understand, and interpret so that you can reuse that data better. It might also include Excel files, especially lists of variables that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute. So here's some examples of what you might include in the data documentation. You might have methods and protocols, so things like sampling, design, instruments that were used to collect the data, the sorts of data recording, data entry tools that were used, contextual information, where the research was conducted, why. You might even have objectives in there. So all stuff around methods and protocols. So those would be obviously documents, text files. A data dictionary, that's more likely going to be sort of an Excel spreadsheet type of a file that will have columns describing each variable and explaining what the coding means for the variable, the units of measurements, that sort of thing. So data dictionary is really important. Trial design, obviously that's also really important, so that again that the person who might be using that data set can understands how it was designed, so that they can then use the best statistical approach to analyze that data. And then a README file, which is kind of like sits above all of those other files, that would just be a document that explains what all these different documents are and directs the user to what information is in each of the documents. So how to use the data set. So all of those could be in the data documentation for a set of data that you're sharing. Now, metadata, I've put a little video there that you can have a look at on your own time. And so hopefully you've downloaded this PowerPoint. I should have said that at the beginning, but hopefully you've done that. So you can click on that link and have a look at that. Likewise, this Dublin Core word that I've got there, there's a link there as well that takes you to a website about Dublin Core. But Dublin Core is basically a standardized system of reporting metadata. So it's a set of general metadata fields, sometimes they're called elements, for describing digital resources. And it was developed in the 1990s, so it was originally for digital libraries. It's at its simplest form, it just has about 15 different fields or elements that describe any digital resource in a consistent way. And those can be divided into these three categories. So content, intellectual property, and then this strange word, instantiation, which is sort of the digital details. It's a word from the world of computer science. But yeah, Dublin Core is sort of a useful way a useful place to look really at how you might build a template for your own metadata, because it has those 15 elements or fields. It has additional information if you go to that website on other fields or elements you might want to include. But the idea is to make your data searchable and findable. Every element that's listed there, it is optional and repeatable, and elements could appear in any order in your particular metadata template. So here's what you might find in the content elements. Things like the title, so the name you've given to that resource. So imagine that it's an Excel file full with maybe results of cultivar evaluation trials conducted over several years on a specific crop. So you'd have a title like that. Subject, topic of the resource. And this is what's really important, these keywords I've mentioned there, using what they call these agrovoc terms. I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, we want the metadata. The idea is that it is, like I said, machine readable, meaning it's searchable by search engines, automated. So you need to use keywords that are widely recognized and used, right? So that's where you'll have to choose keywords carefully to make sure that they're accurately reflecting your data, so it will be easily findable, right? The F in the FAIR principles. Text description, so it could be an abstract or something, and that's likely that an individual would read it, although it might be machine searchable as well. The type of data set, text, image, like a type of resource, sorry. So it could be a text resource, although mostly in this module we're talking about data sets, but it could be images, it could be data sets. Sometimes format is also included in these content element list, where you might name the actual software needed. Source, now this is if it's come from another source, so if it's linked to some other resource that this data set was derived from. So not all of these will apply in every case. And likewise, relation, that's a link to a related resource. So let's say the data set's already been used in a paper that was published using the data set, then you might mention that as well. Coverage, that's the geographic coverage, where and when the material is used. So sometimes that will be two fields, geographic coverage and then temporal coverage. Geographic, where was the material created, what period. Again, my head is obscuring that, but that's actually something like 2019 to 23, so a range of years maybe. It's not the specific date, that's something different. And yeah, Southwest England is geographical coverage. Sometimes, as I said, that's split into two fields. Language, of course. So for that Dublin core, there's these sort of eight. Oh, I got eight there. Yeah, eight fields you might have in the content section. So I'm just going to take a detour into AgriVoc for a minute here. And this is, as I said, a standard vocabulary for keywords. So I've just made a statement there. Consider using standard vocabulary for the keywords in that subject line that I mentioned just now. You can go to the AgriVoc website, which is managed by FAO, and you'll find this agriculture-specific vocabulary. And it's basically a whole sort of thesaurus of words that you can, so that you can make sure that you've got the right keywords in to sort of tag your data, basically, so that it will be much more findable. So here's actually a little activity you can do. So I'm going to you should just maybe pause my video now and open up your PowerPoint so you can do this and use that link. But basically, this will be a good way for you to become familiar with AgriVoc and the thesaurus, the way it works as a thesaurus. So click that link and find your way to this AgriVoc multilingual thesaurus. And then just for as an example, I suggest you put in the word corn, because corn is a word that has many different meanings in the world of crop science, right? So in North America, where I'm from, corn is what Europeans refer to as maize. In Europe, corn sometimes means wheat, sometimes means barley. So it's a very generic term. So it's useful to, if you put that in, and you'll see that the thesaurus will show you all the different possible words it could mean and suggest more specific words you could use in your subject keywords, just to be sure that the readers find, that are looking for looking for information, let's say on wheat, will find it. So choose the keywords that most accurately reflect your material based on the categories of preferred term, entry terms, broader concepts, narrower concepts. So you can have a look at those, and you'll see when you put in a word like corn, you'll get preferred term, entry terms, these other related sort of words that might be relevant to your data set that you could plug into your subject line, subject field in your metadata, and it'll make it more findable. So just take a few minutes now just to have a look at that AgriVoc thesaurus so you're at least familiar with it. And just keep in mind that this is for keywords to use in the subject, the sort of subject description in your metadata. So now moving on to the second sort of broad category of fields within a metadata template that you might be required to fill in. So definitely the metadata will have information on the intellectual property within your in your data. Let me just see what I had hidden there. Oh no, I can't go back. Anyway, it's basically the people or organizations responsible for producing that resource. And as I've been saying in this particular unit, we're mainly thinking about data, sets of data. So there will be a field that's often called creator, the person or organization who's primarily responsible for creating the IP of the materials. That's obviously authors, if this is metadata about a report, let's say, artists, photographers for graphics. But again, if it's data sets, it could be a number of people that were involved in creating that data set. So you could list more than one person. And then other people you could also list as contributors, so not specified as creators, or it could also be organizations. So it could be names of a few individuals and then some organizations that were involved as well. Publisher, so that's normally the repository of the information. So who is making this available? We're going to talk more about repositories for information in the next unit. And then really important bit, the rights, who owns the data, what it can be used for, who holds the license, access restrictions, all that sort of information. So that's in it could be one field or it could be several fields broken up into separate fields as well. But definitely these sorts of fields need to be in the metadata. And then this last strange instantiation elements or fields, all to do with the digital resource actually. So the date, and this isn't the date that the data was collected, it's the date that this material was made available in a format, for public use. So when was it uploaded to a repository, for instance? Often automated if you're using a repository, there'll be a default. They'll just put the date in that you uploaded it. What's the format? So file type, size, that sort of thing. Interesting, I've got CSV there. That remember, I think we talked before about interoperability. So CSV files for data are recommended because they're not linked to any specific software, as opposed to using some other of the file types that we're all very familiar with, where that software might in future become obsolete. So that sort of information goes in this instantiation elements. And of course, the digital object identifier, DOI, so something that's sort of, since the sort of late 90s, early 2000s has become really standard with papers and also sets of data, that we have this digital object identifier that allows, is a unique identifier. So that might be assigned by the repository where you upload the resource to, or you might need to use a tool to generate your own DOI, but pretty important. So there's more on that again in Unit 9.3. And also just on your own time, just to show you how DOIs work. There you can see Zenodo, which is a well-known repository for data and reports, and that's a DOI issued by Zenodo. You can see there. So if you're viewing this as your PowerPoint as opposed to a video, you'll be able to click that link. It just shows you how it takes you to that resource in Zenodo. Okay, so just going to give you a little break from listening to me now. So we're going to fill in this metadata template. So there's a Word file that you should be able to download, which is a example of some metadata, and it's a sort of a table, and it's missing quite a lot of fields in it. And I just thought it might be a good opportunity for you to think a little bit more about metadata. If you filled in the missing fields, they won't be right or wrong answers necessarily for a lot of that table, but just to get you thinking about metadata. So why don't you take a break, and then when we come back, we can just look at that together. So this is just an example of that Word file that you hopefully had a look at and tried to fill in some of the missing data, missing information in the cells that were blank. So just you can have a look at that and see. That shows the 8 sort of first content fields that we talked about earlier in this lecture: title, subject, type, etc. And it's just an example in this case. Well, the third column is a description again of what should be in that field, and then the fourth column is an example for let's say a wheat trial that was conducted in the UK, and you can see just examples of how you might fill in metadata on that. Likewise, for the other 2 categories of metadata, the intellectual property sections there, you can see how that might be filled in, and then the instantiation information, and then also just additional information. So metadata isn't necessarily limited to those 15 sort of Dublin core elements or fields. So you might have some other information like contact name there. But keep in mind, as I said earlier, it's not for long detailed descriptions of the experiment. That goes into the data documentation that can be provided alongside the actual data set. So that's not quite the same as metadata. So hopefully that helped you just start to get your heads around what we mean by metadata. So now let's talk a little more about variables and how we might keep track of them. Again, really important for making sure that the data is reusable, that other people can access your data sets and easily understand what each variable is. And we talked about that before when we talked about the data management plan, that within a project, you basically need a bit of a data dictionary. Likewise, if you're going to share your data set, you'll need a data dictionary. I can't remember actually if I talked about data dictionary. I think I did talk specifically about it when we talked about data management plans, but let's talk about it again. Key part of data documentation. So it's going to list all the variables and columns in your data set along with their meaning, units, and coding scheme. So this is not a spreadsheet of the data. It's a spreadsheet of the variables, what they are, how you code them. So it's basically so people can translate your data file and know what those variables mean. So it's to make the data set understandable and reusable by anyone, and including future you. That's hidden behind my head here, but because as we talked about in Unit 1, we often, in projects that go on for several years, think we're going to remember what we meant when we came up with a certain variable name, and then we may have forgotten in the future. So likewise, people externally also won't always know what we mean by the variable names. So a data dictionary should be provided. And here's an example of what one might look like. So you can see it would have the variable name, description in a few words of what that is, the units, really important. Something on the type, which we talked about again in Unit 1 a little bit, about the type of data, categorical, numeric, discrete, all those different types of data. Just some examples here of what that data might look like and how it was collected as well. Method, assign in the field, farmer records, etc. So I'm going to really strongly recommend using some standard names for variables. So it's really useful if you have some standard names, and there are sort of resources out there that provide standard variable names, just like the AgriVoc that I showed you just earlier in this lecture, which was sort of a standard way set of coming up with keywords for searching information on agriculture. Likewise, there's standard ways to name variables. So key for these things like collaboration, efficient working, linking to protocols, and this whole interoperability and reusability, so the I and the R in FAIR. So I really recommend this ICASA dictionary. If you've got your PowerPoint open at the same time as you're listening to this, you can click that link to take you there. There's basically a set of CSV files that have for sort of standardized names for variables linked to crops and management and measurements that you might do in field trials. So let me just check here. Yeah, so as an exercise, I thought it might be useful if you went to that ICASA dictionary. So hopefully you've opened that hyperlink now, or you can in a minute when we take a break from listening to me, and just go through this this little exercise to become familiar with the ICASA data dictionary. So if you took Module 8 in Unit 8.4, you might remember we had some hypothetical scenarios of cultivar evaluation trials taking place in different places around the world, different sorts of trials. Just choose one of those hypothetical scenarios and then just make a data dictionary that looks like that table I showed you just a couple of slides earlier. So it's going to have a variable name, a description of the variable, the unit, so what the measurement unit is, the type of data, is it categorical, is it nominal, ordinal, discrete, continuous, etc. What sort of values or codes might be recorded for that variable, and just briefly on the method. So think of about 6 variables that you might need to record in that scenario you've chosen, and then go into that ICASA dictionary in the CSV section of the GitHub site. Oh, that should say GitHub, not GitGo. I need to fix that. Take it a note that for measured variables, have a look at that measured data.csv. For management, use management codes. For crop information, use crop codes. So just take a little time now to do this exercise and see if you can come up with just a small data dictionary for one of those scenarios in Unit 8.4. Okay, well, hopefully that exercise using the Akasa data dictionary was useful to you. And if we're doing this in real time, of course, we'll have spend some time discussing how that worked for you and if you have any questions. Um, but if not, hopefully you did find it useful. Now we're going to move on to the last section of the lecture, which is all about GDPR essentials. And this is linked to section 7 of the data management plan template that I introduced in the last unit. So all about GDPR and ethics. So what is GDPR? The General Data Protection Regulation from the EU in 2018, and also outside the EU, most countries have similar regulations regarding protection of people's personal data. It protects privacy and rights of individuals. What we mean by personal data, well, if you take a break from listening to me now and just pause this video and link through to that short video that I've got to hyperlink there in the PowerPoint slides, you'll be able to find out. But basically what that short video explains is that really anything that can identify a farmer or a farm makes the data personal, right? So in on-farm cultivar evaluation trials, this could be things like farmer names and contact details, but it also could be GPS coordinates of the farm, because that can identify landowners. It could be even farm business records if they're linked to some of the farmer's personal information, right? So being very careful with personal information of farmer participants and adhering to the GDPR rules is really important for building trust with farmer participants. It also ensures legal compliance, so avoiding fines or reputational harm. And it makes data sets shareable and publishable, and journals and repositories, they often require compliance with GDPR. And it also builds transparency, so strengthens the collaboration with the farmers and the funders. So it's really important to be aware of it and to be sure that you're following GDPR rules. In research, that means the lawful basis, so usually informed consent. So some sort of consent form, it will be part of the data management plan, or templates will normally be in data management plans, and they may need to be adapted for specific situations with farmers, but have to be sure that really there's been some sort of signed document that the farmer participant has signed. And I know in our own research, we usually provide quite a, not too long, but a brief description of what the research is about, what we're going to be doing on the farm, so the farmer knows what to expect from us, and also it goes into what we expect from them as well. So it's more than just actually about protection of personal data. It becomes a little bit of an agreement. I don't want to say a contract, that sounds a bit too formal, but certainly a written agreement between the farmer and the researcher, so everything's spelled out clearly. And that's signed. So that's just good practice, and it will, and within that you can of course include the information about the data, explain to farmers how the data is going to be used, is an important part of that. So one of the other principles, data minimization, so only collect what you need. Don't be collecting data that's not essential to your research questions, and then have ways that you store the data that are safe, so they're encrypted or password protected. They're on really secure servers, so there's no risk of losing the data, of it leaking. And then wherever possible, anonymizing the data. So definitely when you get to the stage of sharing the data in a repository where it's going to be publicly available, then names and locations would need to be replaced with codes. Maps maybe need to be blurred, may need to sort of look for more less specific geographic locations if the geographic location can specifically identify the farmer. So there needs to be ways you need to think about how to make that data set useful, but but not jeopardizing personal data of those involved. And part of it's also about defining how long you'll keep that data and say when you're going to delete it, when you no longer need it. Okay, so we've now finished all the content in units 1 and 2, and I know it was quite a lot of information there on data management plans, a lot of information on metadata, data documentation, terminology, vocabulary, concepts, a lot to take in. So hopefully you've managed to absorb a lot of that. And just to test your understanding, if you've got your PowerPoint slides open as well, you can just click on that link to take the mid-module quiz and just check on your understanding so far.